Mm.
Well, Lori, welcome to the podcast. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Keith.
It's so good to have you on. I love to talk about leadership. That is my passion. So I'm looking forward to this
Oh,
conversation.
yeah, it's my passion too. And not just the leadership, the development part of it is really my
Yes,
passion.
yes,
Yeah.
that is fun. I've invested my life in several young leaders, so it's been fun to kind of walk alongside them.
Oh, fantastic.
So I get to know you a little bit better. Give me the best piece of advice you've ever received.
Yeah, I thought about this and I have to really credit my father. I grew up in Virginia, and when I was 21, I moved to California. And at that time, we didn't have mobile phones and all of that. And my father wrote me a letter. And his letter basically was saying, trust your own decision making. Like he said, I've seen you over the last like 21 years, and you should trust your own decision making. And I trust your decision making. And that was so profound for me. I still have that letter like almost 40 years later. Yeah.
Wow, that's impressive. And it's a
Yeah.
great reminder when someone pours into you and believes in you, it changes everything.
Yeah. Yeah. It just was like this vote of confidence that was so powerful, especially my, starting a new life in a very different culture and way of operating. Like Virginia and California is like night and day, right? Um, and so to just have that like infusion of support was really profound.
That's awesome. I looked at your bio and I've noticed that no one ever gets where they are without people coming alongside them. Who are some people in your life who served as an inspiration for you? Tell us a little bit about them and give them a shout out.
I will, because I'm going to answer this differently probably. I would say there's like two sets of folks that have been very inspirational for me. One set is the people who I've served or wanted to serve. So I started very early, even in high school, being a counselor at a youth center. And I just saw how many people really had to work hard to advance themselves or to develop themselves in some very, very trying circumstances. And I felt all of those people, so many of them were incredibly inspirational. And I felt like if they can do that, my situation, although, everybody has their hardship, it was, basically survivable. Like I feel like, hey, if they can do it, I can do it. And I would say the second is I became a coach fairly early in my career, and I've had a series of coaches over time, all of who have been just amazingly supportive and not just inspirational, but inspiration plus pushing me, right? So they're not just saying what they did and then I'm trying to emulate it. They were, amazing people in their own right, but their whole point was, no, you can do it. Don't hold back. Don't just you reach your potential. That's how you really serve everybody.
Coaching is not something that most people think about doing. What led you to want to coach leaders?
Yeah, it's really a great question because it wasn't a straightforward path. Okay. So I started out as the youth counselor. I went to college and became a social worker and then moved to San Francisco, worked for Children's Home Society Emergency Shelter Care Program, which was for children newborn to 18 that were in some kind of a neglected or dangerous situation. And I did that for quite a few years, 2, 3 years, let's say, and it just broke my heart. Like I just thought, if I do this for a whole career, I'm going to be the most jaded person, and I just can't. I wanted to adopt all those kids. I just was like too tenderhearted for it. So I went back to school and became a therapist. I got a master's degree, got licensed as a therapist, and hated it. And the reason I hated it was because it was all about the past. And I kept wanting to ask this one question, which is like, what have you done differently since the last time we spoke? And in all of my supervision and everything, everyone told me you can't ask that. It was at that time kind of a medical model of therapy, and you had to like go back and heal the past. And my point of view was like, wait, these people are in trouble right now in the moment. Let's help them get on better footing first. And then if we can heal the past, great. But if not, at least they'll be on better footing. So I never practiced that. But I had this degree. So I went and taught college psychology for a while. And then from there, I went into training and development and got into the corporate world, training and development. And about 10 years after all of this, suddenly in the early 90s, there was this thing called coaching. And they were asking my question, what have you done differently since the last time we spoke? And I was like, what? This is the thing I've been waiting for. So I ran and got certified as a coach right away. It was like one of the first 200 certified coaches in the world, actually, because, they were just newly certifying people. It doesn't actually mean anything. But I was just early to the profession and just fell in love with it and very quickly got into coaching leaders. And the reason I like coaching leaders, really two reasons. One, they're often quite self-motivated, but the other is their impact's exponential. So if I coach an individual, they have let's say a small pond. They have their community pond, maybe their family pond, but a leader can have a much larger pond. So every person that I'm impacting is now impacting a lot more people. And I really love that, expanded or exponential impact. So I got into coaching leaders and organizations and did it for 20 years. And then I just felt like, wait, I still need more impact than this. Like I'm still getting only a small slice, impacting a slice of the pie. So then I started sounding board with another woman who had been a previous coaching client of mine. And our whole point was to bring the gift of coaching to all leaders in an organization, or even potential leaders, pre-leaders, people who want to be leaders, informal leaders, not just the people at the top of the house. Because in my career, I mostly coach people who are in the C-suite. And so bringing it really to a much more diversified audience is going to serve everybody.
I love that story. I got into coaching because when I was a young leader, I didn't know what I was doing. And so I sought out someone who did know what they were doing. And I ran across John Maxwell. And I'm like, this is what leadership looks like.
Yep. Wow. So you got one of the original OGs, right?
That's right. Yeah. And I went to every seminar he did. I bought every book he wrote, and I just dove into that. And then what I realized early on, like you did, is I'm called to lead others. So I started coaching my church staff, and we started every single meeting every month with me showing them the video 21 Irrefutable Laws, and we went through and I taught that to my leadership team. So it's like, you're right. It's about exponentially exploding what the potential is as you pour into people in coaching.
Yes. And I actually had a period where I coached a lot of different religious leaders, both in traditional and in Eastern religions. And one thing I found out, none of them had any leadership training, right? They had a lot of, say, biblical training or pastoral training, but none of them had any leadership training. And yet they were running, some of them, very large congregations. And it was really hard on them to not really have the background to do that well, because, of course, their intent was to do that well. So I thought it was interesting. There wasn't a lot of training. It's the same with like engineers. They get like all this deep training, but none of it's on leadership. And now they're the engineering manager and they have 300 people under them and they don't know what to do.
You're right. I'm curious for someone like yourself who focuses on leadership. I asked a person who's working with managers this question. How would you differentiate between leadership and management?
Oh, that's a good question. So I have a very simple definition of leadership, which is you are not a leader unless people want to follow you. Okay? Because unless people are following you, you're not leading, you're just walking along by yourself. For managers, I don't often think they are, again, trained or taught or even think about having people follow them. The frame of reference is more like I have to do something to them to get things done. And to me, a manager should be a leader, is a leader, but then they have to think about how are they going to get the work done with other people, not by making other people do it. You know, anything where you're having to use that kind of force, now you're not leading, leading because people aren't coming with you. You are dragging them along or pushing them or something like that. And I always use this little example of a string. If you just put a string on the table and you try to push the string, it just gets all balled up, right? Nothing happens. But if you pull the string and the string's following, now you get the nice, extended thread. So to me, managers are leaders. They often just don't operate like leaders, and we would all be better if they did.
I love that. So let's dive into your book,
Okay.
Leadership Revolution, The Future of Developing Dynamic Leaders.
Yeah.
What led you to write that?
Having been in the kind of development, let's just say development industry my whole career, and then leader development in the second, maybe 2/3, I have just seen the environment change so dramatically over the last 30 years. And I have seen the way we develop leaders not changing. And so I've made the title revolution, and I don't mean it necessarily like revolution, like a violence or something. I mean it like revolution. The wheel is turning, it's revolving. And for us to develop leaders that can really be impactful in the current environment, we're going to have to do it differently. And almost all the leader development approaches, even John Maxwell, all came out of the last century, right? Now, many people have updated the individuals particularly, but all of those old 360 assessments, the basic thinking that skills is all there is, like if you have skills, you're going to be good. The models of leadership, like if you have these 5 traits, you'll be a good leader. None of that actually works anymore, right? Our environment is too different. It's so much more complex. It's so much more unpredictable, so much more diverse. So much more time people are spending in the unknown, not knowing what's coming next. And just like the most simple thing, like last century we had maybe like 2 or 3 generations in the workforce. Now we have 5 or 6 generations in the workforce, and they're very different. The oldest generation wants something entirely different from the youngest generation. And so if you're just having one old style way of being a leader, you're probably not going to be that successful in the current and future environment. So really, like, not to diss anything from the past, it was perfect for that environment. But now everything externally has changed, and we just haven't changed how we're developing leaders.
So you said something I want to dig a little deeper into. You said leadership is different now than it was in the past. How is it different?
In the 70s, 80s, 90s, even, leadership was this command and control kind of approach. Like there is this big distinction. I'm a leader, you're a follower, and I tell you what to do, and it's my way or the highway, right? That worked at that time for a couple of reasons. The environment was more predictable. So that leader maybe did know what needed to happen because they'd done it before, right? Because the same thing was going to happen again. That no longer works now. Like you can see with our economy, we kept trying to say this is like 1970. Guess what? No, it isn't. It has some components of 1970, but sorry, it's not 1970 anymore, and it's not operating like 1970. Um, and so the same in the work environment. It's just not operating that way anymore. You don't, but pandemic's a great example. Like we haven't faced that in the last 50 years, and suddenly you have that. And if you don't have any versatility as a leader, if you can't adapt, if you can't think out in the future, if you can't respond in different ways, and then something unknown hits you in the face, you're going to be in trouble. So that predictable environment is very different. The other was, you had primarily men in the workforce in the last century. My first 10 years of a coach, I only coached men, which was shocking. But why was that? They're the only ones that were in the C-suite, right? And then after 2000, I got some women, and now more. Still, we could obviously go a lot farther down that pathway. But still, the environment's more diverse, gender, ethnic background, all the political points of view and gender diversity, and just so many different things now that weren't in play back in the 70s, 80s, 90s.
So in my study I did of my doctoral work, I studied the different kinds of leadership and how it impacts change in the church. And it was funny because I was taught throughout my entire doctoral program that the best kind of leader to be was a servant leader.
Mm-hmm.
In my research, I discovered that servant leaders struggle to really make organizational change.
Yeah, and why? Why? Because of course, doesn't it make sense? Servant leader is the best leadership. I thought that too.
Yeah, and it was transformational. It wasn't servant leaders, actually.
Yeah.
So what you're describing, though, is we can't get caught up in a type in this workforce. So is there a new kind of leader that we haven't even discovered yet, that we haven't put a category on yet, that you've discovered in your work as a coach?
Yes, I think so. So I'll tell you a story of that old style. At one point, some books came out and it identified a charismatic leader as the best kind of leader. And I had a client who was, because I had a lot of companies in the sciences and technology. And so this was somebody who was a scientist, and he was very introverted. His whole life was looking in a microscope. But he read this and he thought he should be charismatic. So he tried to be charismatic. And everyone, this is how I got to coaching him. Everyone was like, what's wrong with him? What happened to him? Because it was just so fake, and they thought he was drinking. And that's why they brought me in to try to help him. And then later, after I talked to him, I found out, no, he was trying to be charismatic. And I was like, look, you are not, that's not who you are. You're never going to be that. You were doing fine before. Let's enhance the things that you do have instead of trying to start something new that you don't have. And so he stopped being charismatic. Everyone gave a big sigh of relief there. And then we just doubled down on his strengths, and he was very successful. So I would say the new approach to leadership is not what anybody's telling you from the outside. It is blending your natural traits with some sets of capabilities and capacities that work in your current context. So, for example, what might work in having organizational impact in a church or religious environment might be different in, a company in England or something. Like, it's just not going to be the same. So that contextual piece of it is really important. And it really takes a coach or somebody, a mentor, or even a pastor to help you identify what are your key traits, and then how do you apply those key traits in this current context to support the outcomes that you're looking for. So it's a little bit of like 3D chess. There's like you're putting together a few pieces to create this unique leadership approach that's very specific to you and what you're doing.
So in your coaching, how do you help people discover I like the word you use in your book, your authentic self. How do you show up as an authentic leader? Because like you said, that one poor guy all of a sudden trying to be charismatic, people thought he was drinking. So how do you not come off as inauthentic because you're trying to be something that you're just not?
Yeah, I mean, I think it all does source back to your sense of self-awareness. And in the early, people's early careers, they often are trying to be someone else because they've read so much about how you have to be successful. And when they go back and be like, wait a minute, who am I really? And they start to identify that, there really is this huge sense of relief for people, which is like, what, really? I can be who my God given person and still be successful. I don't have to try to be somebody else. Yes. And that doesn't mean you don't have to enhance some of those things, but you want to start, the foundation is basically who you are. And so starting to really get clear on who that is, and some ways to do that, like what are the things you like to do when things are really, really hard and you're straining, that it doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, but maybe that's not your most natural attribute. The things where you find you're having more impact, those are your more natural attributes. When you feel like you're in the flow or kind of in your element, right? Like, I bet you feel this a bit with your podcast. Like, when you're in the flow of the conversation, it's a natural element for you. Someone else is going to be nervous in a podcast and not, laugh,
Right.
right? So it's like really doing a self assessment and figuring out where your highlights are. And the old style approach was like, know your highlights and your challenges and then fix your challenges, used to be the old style. My approach is not know your highlights and then get people around you that have the highlights that you don't have. So now you're operating as a team and you're complementary and other people can contribute. So it doesn't all have to be about you. The last century approach was like, as the leader, you had to have everything yourself. Like, who's going to have everything? Nobody. Right. And if you think you do, now you're being pretty delusional and egocentric. Right. So instead, figure out and really apply what you're good at and supplement that around you by people who are good at the things that you're not.
So as you're trying to help your coaches figure out themselves, do you use assessments like, say, a Myers-Briggs, or have you moved to something else? Because I know Myers-Briggs, in my memory of Myers-Briggs, it's impacted by your environment and where you're at in that moment. So if you're in a stressful situation and you take the Myers-Briggs, you may come off as one thing. Like, I remember when I was in the parish, I came off as a high D and a high I. Much less I, but much higher D. When I moved to this role, when I'm more facilitator, my D went down and now I'm a much higher I. And so
Okay.
it's shifted.
Well, but that's a good thing because I Myers, any of those things can provide information. As long as you don't treat them like it's the truth, right? They're models.
Right.
Like Jung had a great quote that I love. He said, "Learn your models well, and then set them aside when you encounter the miracle of the human soul." So models can help you, but they're not going to tell you who you are. That's I like a model that's a more behavioral model. It's not who you are on the inside, it's how you show up on the outside. And I like that because you can see it from the outside. And the premise of that model is not that one way of showing up is better, but that the more adaptable you are, the more successful you're going to be. And that adaptation means to the context you're in. So, look, you moved to a different role. And so, different of your strengths came to the forefront, right? If you're in a different context, different strengths might come to the forefront. If you're, an individual contributor or a parishioner, some of your strengths might be really appropriate there. Some others might not, right? So being able to adapt to your environment is really, it's sort of like the basic biological premise too, like the species that adapt are the ones that evolve over time. Same for leadership.
I love that. I was talking to a friend of mine. We were trying to compare our leadership styles. And he asked me if I could define what my style was. I'm like, well, it's a combination. Sometimes it's charismatic and sometimes it's transformational. When I'm presenting, it's charismatic, but I
Right.
can't live in that charismatic style.
Right.
And it makes me kind of uncomfortable because I think people sort of follow that charismatic style. So I don't like tap into my full charismatic nature, I guess I would say. But the other part of me, I prefer to kind of rest in the transformational leadership style. So I tell
Yeah.
them it's kind of a situational thing.
Yes, and like if you're in a speaking role or in a role where you're meant to be inspirational, turning on your charismatic abilities, it's like kind of like turning the volume up, right?
Right.
It's really useful, but maybe in a one-on-one, and if I'm maybe grieving or something, you having that volume of your charismatic style high isn't going to be a fit, right? I'm like, whoa, you need to tone it down a little bit. So it's more like adjusting all the frequencies that you're operating on based on what's happening in front of you. And obviously, the more places you can adjust, the better fit you're going to be for whoever's there with you.
All right. So here's your chance to impact the audience. What's the secret to exceptional leadership?
Very funny you should ask that because we actually created a model for that. Because my coaching, like little tagline was transforming brilliant scientists and technologists into exceptional leaders. So to do that, I had to kind of identify as exceptional leaders. And you're probably going to like it because the number one trait is your internal compass, let's call it. The part inside you that keeps you directed where you need to go, right? And you can actually cultivate that. And it's very important to cultivate that because when you're in a leadership role, a lot of pressure is coming at you from all ways. Everybody wants something from you. And if you don't have a strong central compass there, we call it central equilibrium. In other words, when all those forces are pushing you, you're not falling over. You have that internal strength to just stay upright in integrity with yourself, regardless of those forces. And so that really is the key to exceptional leadership. And what's probably interesting for many people is like a spiritual core is really important to that, right? So, one of the ways to develop that is through your spiritual life. Another way to develop that, which I've used, is through the martial arts. So we're mentioning your sword in the background because the core of the martial arts is this internal balance. You can also develop it just from being in your life and really working to not get knocked over by the things that are hitting you. The image I like to use is I call it the eye of the storm, where if you see those like
Mm.
pictures of the hurricane going and it's all swirling around, but right in the middle, it's quiet. And still, and when the plane goes through there, it's all sunny and bright inside there. If you can just stay in the eye of the storm, you can actually see sort of 360 all the stuff that's swirling around you, and you can make better choices because you're balanced. You're not off balance and then making a choice from an off balance place. So that sort of central equilibrium, compass, integrity, you probably have some words for it, whatever is that internal core inside yourself, it's really the secret to exceptional leadership.
Wow. Okay, great. Now I can go be an exceptional leader because you gave me the secret.
Wow, if it was that easy, everyone would be doing it, right?
That's right. Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm curious, Lori, what are you excited about in this season of your life?
Oh, you're surprising me with this one. Let's see. So I am entering, like, I already retired from my career, and then I kind of started another career that I didn't realize I was going to start. I'm like the oldest startup founder in the book, because my company is backed by Silicon Valley people. And so I didn't really think I was going to be doing that, but here I am. So I don't know what's next, but I'll say this. Obviously in the last part of my career, I feel so much freedom to do what I want, be what I want, operate how I want. Like all of the stuff you have when you're coming up, where you're like trying to please other people and trying to get a reputation and trying. I feel like I am having the opportunity now to not quote try, but really take everything I've learned and give it back to others. And that was part of the book, just putting all that stuff I learned over all those years in a book. I've just poured it into the company's sounding board. And I really hope those are, things that help people over time, even when I'm not, personally here pushing them along.
That's awesome. You've spent your life pouring into people. When your last coaching session is ended, what do you want your legacy to be?
I mean, kind of back to that internal compass, that I feel satisfied with what I've offered in this lifetime. And I can lay in my deathbed and say, hey, in my own estimation, I did well. And I don't mean monetarily well, like by that time it's not going to matter, right? I'm not going to be able to take it with me. I really mean
Right.
I feel satisfied with myself around what I did during this lifetime. And I can tell you, I already feel that, like I'm a parent, and I feel very both lucky and satisfied with the parenting and how that all worked out. And, my earlier career, I felt really satisfied with that, and didn't feel sad when I wrapped that up after 20 years. I felt like the arc of that, happened, and it was like the perfect kind of thing. So I already feel fairly good, but I just feel like, hey, not done yet. I probably should be done, but I'm not done yet. I think it's going to go on another 20, 30 years, I'm sure.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
As you wrap up this conversation, what are some key takeaways or insights you want our listeners to remember from our discussion today?
Yeah. A couple. One, just know it always does come back to yourself and who you are and what you're doing from the inside of yourself, regardless of what's happening outside. And a second might be that everybody on here just has amazing potential. Like, I have never met one person who didn't have pretty incredible potential, and I rarely met people who were meeting all their potential. So everybody out there, you have amazing potential, and you're not meeting it. So, hey, the third thing, get a coach, get a mentor, get a pastor, get somebody who's going to be able to help you see your potential and really utilize it for your own and everyone's good.
That's great. Where can people find your book, Leadership Revolution, The Future of Developing Dynamic Leaders, and learn more about you?
Yeah, they can find it on any of the online places like Amazon, Barnes and Noble. And you can also go to the website soundingboardinc.com. It'll tell you about the coaching company as well as have the access for the book. And we have a product on there that's for one-on-one coaching. If you're interested, you can look it up. It's called Accelerate. And then you can always be in contact with me through LinkedIn at Lori Mazan, Mazan. Surprisingly, I'm the only Lori Mazan on the planet.
And you are unique.
Yep, as we all are.
Well, Lori, thanks so much for taking the time to be on the podcast and offering such great content on leadership. Blessings on your work and the book that you're working on, and the way you're impacting people's lives by helping them to discover their unique self and to lead in a way that impacts not only themselves, but the world around them.
Yes. Thank you. A pleasure talking with you.